Good morning and welcome, everybody. We're just going to give it a minute before we get started to allow everybody to join. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give it one more minute, allow a couple more moments for folks to join this morning before we get started. All right. Let's get started. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Mike Skelton. I'm the President and CEO of the Business and Industry Association of New Hampshire. I want to welcome you to our webinar this morning on federal policy updates with a focus on immigration as well as tariffs and sharing some information for what employers need to know. I think, as you all know, there's a lot happening right now on the federal policy front. And at the BIA, we've been hearing a lot from our members, questions, concerns, looking for information and insights. And from a practical standpoint on both immigration as well as tariffs, these are two issues that can impact your day-to-day business operations. And so today's program is meant to give you some information, some insights, some updates, some things that you can do practically to prepare for what's ahead. Just a few housekeeping items, as well as a quick overview of how we're going to tackle this over the next hour. In a moment, I'm going to hand things over to our panelists. We're really pleased to be partnering with McLane Middleton to be delivering today's webinar, and want to thank them for their support for helping us produce this program. I'm going to hand it over to their team in just a moment. They're going to run through a bunch of information related to immigration and really as employers, what you need to know, what you need to be doing to be prepared for this issue, and some best practices. We're going to throughout encourage you to use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and we're going to be monitoring that throughout the program on questions that the panel can answer, that the BIA team can answer on a variety of topics, whether it's immigration, tariffs, or otherwise. We're going to try to get to those, as many of those throughout and towards the end of the program. After the McLane team covers immigration for a good chunk of the first part of our webinar, towards the end, I'm going to come back on and give you some information on tariffs and what we've heard from our partners in DC at the National Association of Manufacturers, U.S. Chamber, and some insights, updates, and latest news on that front. This webinar is being recorded. It will be sent out to our membership and attendees after the fact, so you can refer back to it. You can share it with others. And again, we encourage you to use the Q&A to ask away any questions that you have. We really want to build the conversation this morning around your questions and insights and things that you are curious about. So with that, again, we are really excited and pleased to be working with McLane Middleton as our partners and underwriters for this program, and helping bring some expertise and insights to this important topic, and specifically on immigration, which has significant implications for many employers throughout our state. So to introduce our experts this morning, I'm going to hand it over to Michael Delaney, who's the Director and Chair of the Litigation Department at McLane Middleton. Michael is a former Attorney General of New Hampshire, highly regarded in and out of government for his strategic judgment and skills as a lawyer. He represents organizations and individuals of federal, state government investigations, internal investigations, regulatory compliance issues, and complex civil, criminal, and administrative litigation. Michael provides counsel to organizations on crisis management and strategic responses to government inquiries. Thank you, Michael, for being here this morning, and I hand it over to you to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Michael, and it's great to join you this morning. The wide participation in this live webinar is just another reminder that we are undergoing, right, a significant transition period in federal policy in many areas. And even for the three legal practitioners running this webinar, the pace of the changes is really hard for everyone to follow. And while this is impacting the private sector, businesses and organizations in lots of different ways, we know from our conversations with our clients and our community colleagues that the impact on the current workforce in New Hampshire, the impact on the potential future of workforce development in New Hampshire is front on all of your minds. And it is going to require a greater degree of situational awareness at present in terms of what's going on. And that's why we're so thankful to Michael Skelton and Laura McMahon for partnering with McLane on this subject matter. We're going to start with the topic of immigration, and I'm very pleased to introduce you to my colleagues, Shiva Karimi and John Wilson. Shiva is the director and chair of the Immigration Law Practice Group at McLane Middleton. She's a member of our management committee at the firm. She represents a wide range of clients navigating complex immigration system issues, industries, including staffing, tech, healthcare, independent schools. John Wilson is of counsel in the corporate and immigration departments at McLane Middleton. He is best known as one of the co-founders of Goff Wilson, a preeminent global immigration law firm located right here in the Granite State. And we are most pleased that effective January 1, John and his colleagues have partnered with McLane Middleton. He runs a global immigration practice focusing on both inbound and outbound facing employers. And he represents businesses large and small, from multinational corporations to nonprofits that are just struggling to keep up. So with that, my recommendation is that we start to just level set with some common terminology and some background that we all should have for the upcoming discussion. And with that, Shiva, can you just level set us for some background on immigration law and the core issues we should all be familiar with for this discussion?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for coming out and joining us today and hearing about this topic, that's so relevant today. So, as Mike said, whenever I have an immigration discussion, I'm sure, there are many people listening who have a lot of experience with immigration, people who have not dealt with immigration, but we've all been hearing about it. So just sort of thinking about just the overall structure of the immigration system in the United States, I think about immigration in its simplest form as sort of three different buckets. Immigration is permission to be in the United States, to live in the United States, work in the United States, do various things. So we generally know about citizenship. That's a fairly common status that we're aware of. A citizen is someone who, U.S. citizen can be in the United States, live and work permanently in the United States. And we know that there are birthright citizens, and that's been disputed a bit lately. But that is generally a type of U.S. immigration, U.S. Citizenship, excuse me. And then we have naturalized citizens as well, people who have been here for a certain time period and have applied for naturalization. So that's sort of the strongest immigration status that we think about in the United States. The next one is we call somebody who has a green card, permanent resident, lawful permanent residence, all the same thing. So a permanent resident is somebody who has the ability to live and work in the United States on a permanent basis, but that status is a little bit more fragile than citizenship. So somebody has a green card and they have a criminal issue, or if they are not residing in the United States, they've stayed outside the United States for too long, those individuals can lose that status. So, it is a good status, a secure status, but it is something that can be challenged, as we've seen in the news lately. And then the last bucket that I think about, and there are many other statuses, and we'll talk about some of those today, is a non-immigrant. A non-immigrant is an individual who can come to the United States for a specific purpose. It's a finite period, a specific, intent. So those are statuses such as, they usually begin with the letter of the alphabet. So a B1, B2 visitor's visa, an individual who's coming to the U.S. to visit Disney World for a little while, and they're going to go back again. They're going to come for 2 weeks, and their intention is to leave again. again. A student visa, an F1 student visa, an individual who comes to the US, they intend to study for 4 years, get a degree, and then upon the completion of their studies, they'll return back to their home country. Similarly, there are many work visas, H-1B visas, L-1 visas. We hear about a lot of these. These are visas that allow somebody to come in, again, specific time period, usually 3 years. There are maximums as well, and they can come and work for, usually tied to a specific employer. And again, with most visas, they would return to their home country upon the completion. Some of the ones that we've heard about in the news today, recently, H-1Bs, those are specialty occupation visas that require at least a bachelor's degree or above for entry into that position. H-2B visas, those are seasonal worker visas, and I know that probably a lot of people on this call, see those. Those are individuals who come in either for a season or a peak need, and they're usually they can be unskilled workers. And again, they complete that project and they'll leave, and numerous other work visas as well. As I mentioned, lots of other types of immigration status, TPS that we hear about. We'll talk about some of that. We'll talk about parole, but I just wanted to give sort of that overview as Mike suggested, so we're all coming at this from the same place. So I'll stop there, and I don't know, John, if you want to add anything, and Mike, I see you saying something as well. Mike, you're muted.
Excuse me, John, you've been following immigration policy changes, right, nationally for decades. Can you give the audience just sort of a general lay of the land right now as to what's going on with immigration law and foreign workers in New Hampshire?
Well, yeah, only if I have 3 hours, Mike, and I don't. So let me just try to winnow it down here a little bit. Mike, you said at the beginning, it's an ever-changing landscape with immigration, and that's the understatement. It really is changing so quickly. The information is coming from a fire hose right now. Just this morning, CBS announced that President Trump decided to pause or stop the processing of green card applications for people who are in the United States in refugee or asylee status. That's never been done. It's quite a shock. These people are fully employable in their own right now. But I think that that just maybe is a bellwether as to what we're facing in the world of immigration. Yesterday, good news for some New Hampshire employers. There's a court order that says that those refugees that are in the pipeline, those people that are ready to come over, we're ready to come over, airline ticket in hand, so to speak, they must now be processed. So the U.S. will be taking in tens of thousands of refugees. I don't know how many might be coming into New Hampshire. Refugees, as some of you may know, are fully employable on the day they land. There's no restriction, and they are filling a need in New Hampshire. I think if we step back and look broadly at New Hampshire, we have about 7% of our population that was foreign born. And if we look over the last 10 years or so, we have to appreciate that in New Hampshire, there are more people dying than there are people being born. So we're losing natural population here. And there really are two ways in which we are substituting for those people that are no longer here. And that would be through in-migration within the United States or internationally. And about half of it comes internationally. And if we look at all the statistics, and I'm reading from the Economic and Labor Market Information Report that recently came out in New Hampshire, New Hampshire's population age 65 and older is expected to grow from 258,000 people now to well over 400,000 in 2040, which is just around the corner. And unless we maintain in migration, we're not going to have a sufficient workforce. We also, and we're going to, Shiva will probably lead off in just a second on TPS, but as we look at TPS, temporary protected status, we've heard a lot about people from Venezuela and from Haiti. That's ending, and again, we'll talk about that. But in New Hampshire, we have about 500 people in TPS status from Venezuela, other countries as well. Those people we're going to lose. In addition, we have about 95,000 people in New Hampshire that are foreign born working here in a legal or not legal status. Of those 95,000, 15,000, best estimate, are undocumented. They don't have the right to work, but they're working. Pretty sure that those people we're going to lose. So New Hampshire's going to lose about 15,000. Now, we say, well, those people aren't documented. They shouldn't be working. And, we have to agree with that. But at the same time, we're going to lose people in construction. We're going to lose people in hospitality. And we don't have any people to replace them. And that's in addition to what we're going to be speaking of in just a moment that talks about the more difficulty of getting even legal immigration. One thing I wanted to comment that Shiva mentioned on H-2Bs and looking forward, those are people, as Shiva mentioned, that come into the United States on a temporary basis to fill a seasonal need or a one-time occurrence or what have you. And we use a lot of H-2Bs in New Hampshire. Unfortunately, the need in the US is about 500,000 or 600,000, and the allotted number is about 66,000. So there's a lottery involved. For those employers who need to hire H-2B workers for the winter season, now's the time to do it. Get on it, do it. For those that want to hire them for next summer, August and September of this year is when you should be ratcheting that up. We not on this webinar. We have a couple of attorneys that do an awful lot of H-2Bs. So if you need anything answered on that. So I just wanted to throw that in, Mike, kind of as a warm up as to where we are in New Hampshire and the need for foreign workers in all sectors, a lot in healthcare, and I'm sure we'll touch on that. So let me flip it back over to Mike and Shiva on TPS, and I'm sure I'll jump in a second.
Great, thank you, John. And Shiva, John mentioned specifically TPS and more generally, right? There are executive orders, there are policy statements, there are new guidance memorandums. A lot has come out. Can we talk a little bit about what these executive orders and related documents specifically say and what it means in New Hampshire?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So actually building on what John said, starting with TPS. So we know that, as John said, there are many individuals in the U.S. on TPS. Haitians have been in the United States on TPS since 2010, so for a very long time. Venezuelans since 2022. And those two statuses, and you may know temporary protected status, it's a status that allows individuals to be in the United States when the country conditions in their home country are unsafe. And they are granted employment authorization, and that's a huge help to us. Many individuals are working, lawfully pursuant to that type of employment authorization. So TPS for those two nationalities will end coming, I think it's August of 2025. And so those individuals will be left without any status, without employment authorization. I've had many questions from employers saying, because there are various different ways of extending status. There are automatic employment authorization extensions and things like that. And employers are saying, what's going to happen now? And the answer is, if things go according to, what's been publicized, then that will end on August of this year. And there won't be anything that employers can do to keep those individuals lawfully employed. Additionally, there's a parole program for, it's a CHNV, so Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And that is also set to end in April. And those individuals will also lose status. So two very, I think very difficult thing for employers who have had that workforce in place for some time. And it really is, as John said, difficult to replace.
Let me interrupt here, Shiva, real quick on that. You're probably aware of Uniting for Ukraine, or U4U program that brings people into the United States from Ukraine. The Trump administration has paused everybody that's in the pipeline and has stopped new people from applying under that program. I know that there are a number of employers in the U.S. That are employing, and in New Hampshire, employing people under the Uniting for Ukraine program. It's unclear as to whether or not those people here will be able to continue. We think so, but probably renewing or extending or new people is not going to happen.
So John and Shiva, thinking about the things that New Hampshire employers need to know at present, in addition to these individuals with permitted status that may be transitioning, that raises the question in everyone's mind about anticipated increase in enforcement relative to these changes in federal policy, and specifically how that is going to hit a private employer that may be in one building, that may be, in several buildings across the street. It may be organizations that are particularly concerned about individuals or family members of individuals at their place. What do employers need to anticipate and know about the anticipated increase in enforcement activity to implement these federal policies?
Let me jump in on that. Shiva helped me out, of course, but we get a lot of questions about this because across the country, we see that the Immigration Custom and Enforcement, or ICE, the enforcement arm of the Immigration Service, if you will, has been conducting raids at work sites, and employers are worried about this, nervous about this. What do we do? How do we react to it? What happens if they knock on the door? Let's break it down a little bit. Let's look at first somebody, the immigration officer just coming, or ICE officer coming into the your business establishment. What can they do? What can't they do? Do you need to talk to them? Whatever. First of all, you should have a designated point of contact. If they show up, you already ought to have somebody set to go. This is the person that we need to speak to within the organization that will then better direct what next steps are. Now, when they do come in, they may come in for a couple of different reasons. Personal experience on this, they're very nice people when they come in the door, very friendly most of the time, but don't be, fooled by that. They have a job to do. They are the enforcement arm, and their job is to enforce the laws, whether it be I-9 compliance or people who are undocumented. Now, we're seeing an uptick in it in a couple different ways. Sometimes they walk in and they say, well, I'm just here to talk to so-and-so. I am an H-1B compliance officer, and I want to be sure that the person is actually working here doing that which you said they were going to do in their immigration application. That person has a right to speak to that employee, to talk to them, to see what they're doing. You have to produce their public access folder and things of that sort. If you don't know what we're talking about, then you should if you have somebody working in H-1B status. And that's perfectly okay. But it says to me that the Immigration Service is trying to find whether or not you, the employer, are compliant with what you said the employee would do. Shiva and I have found oftentimes that employers are not compliant and they run into trouble. So now's the time to put your house in order when it comes to those people legally working for you. Or the Immigration Service may come in and say, look, I'm interested in looking at your I-9s. Do you have to produce them that day? Not without a warrant, you don't. You don't, or a subpoena. You don't have to produce them. But what they'll say is you need to produce all of the originals, or if they're electronic, within 3 business days. And what does that say to us? That says that your I-9s ought to be in order, because we've gotten these calls. Look, I just got this yesterday. I have 2 days. What do I do? Well, you have 5,000 employees. There's not a lot you can do. You have to produce them. So now is the time to do a self-audit, internal audit, bring somebody in to do an audit for you, to look at them, to correct them as best you can, to put them in order. And we've seen that, a big uptick in the last couple of months, people interested in getting their I-9s in order because they're worried. They're worried about these ICE raids coming in and asking to see their I-9s. So now's the time to put those in order. The bigger problem is when they come in and they say, well, I'm here and I want to talk to people in the back room on the floor of the manufacturing plant. And do they have a right to do that? Let's assume they do not have a warrant. They can go into public spaces. They cannot go into private spaces. So make sure you designate which is public and which is private. We have employers that are putting signs on doors that says private. So this, it seems silly, but this is a designation. You know, you can go into the waiting room, you can stand in the waiting room, but you can't cross through the next door where there are offices, where there are people. So they can go into public places. They can't go into private places. One of the questions that always comes up is, do I instruct my employees not to speak to ICE? No, you don't instruct them not to speak to ICE. You may say to them, you have the option of not speaking to ICE, but you can't tell them not to. You don't want to get between the employee and ICE. You just want to be sure that they understand they don't need to speak to ICE. Now, Mike, I don't know if you want to address judicial warrants versus administrative warrants and what the difference is there, and whether or not they produce a judicial warrant or a administrative warrant.
Sure, I'm glad to do that, John. And then Shiva, I'm going to flip it over to you to talk about ICE policies. Keep in mind that when these law enforcement officials come in first, as John said, these are professionals. And in my experience, when you have law enforcement entering a private workforce, yes, in this context, it's immigration, but it happens in all kinds of other contexts as well. DEA, other organizations that are interested in seeing people in facilities. You know, the first question you all have to make is, am I going to allow ICE to access my facility? If you are in charge, you can certainly do that. However, my experience is most employers are worried about the overall general impact, right, on their workforce and the fear if they do that. Most elect not to. So if ICE arrives with paperwork, your point of contact really needs to make sure they understand what that paperwork is. And it will generally be one of two things. Probably 99% of the time, it will be something called an administrative subpoena as opposed to a judicial subpoena. One is signed by a federal executive branch official who has authority to issue the subpoena. The other one is a court order signed by a judge. And it's not intuitive, right, what these documents are, because they look very similar. And it's really hard to tell if they're signed by a judge or signed by a federal employee. So you may need legal assistance, or you need someone in your office that understands that distinction. And if it's an administrative subpoena, they likely have authority to obtain records as distinguished from access or searching of your premises. And if it's an administrative subpoena, generally speaking, they cannot gain access to your facility with that subpoena. They can receive documents within your possession, custody, or control. Conversely, if it is a judicial subpoena, that could allow them to actually search your private workplace. And if they have that, you need to give them access. But I will tell you the probable cause that would need to be established to access your entire facility, that's a fairly significant showing. And you should likely get legal help on that to understand what paperwork is coming into the door. So Shiva, I know you've been giving a lot of guidance on ICE policies, you know, for arrivals and response. What are employees asking you about whether they should have a policy? What are you telling them, and what are the parameters of that?
For travel specifically, Mike, or policies around ICE visits?
Why don't you cover both, because travel is an important consideration here.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think, you know, going back to what John sort of started the conversation with, having a point person, you know, reducing all of this to writing is really, I think it makes employees feel comfortable. You know, what can they do? What should they do? What shouldn't they do? I think, you know, as John said, sometimes ICE agents can be very friendly and come in and say, oh, you know, just have a couple questions. And people are often very happy and willing to, you know, to cooperate, and, oh, I'm going to do a good thing. I'm going to help this person. And then they're going to, you know, feel better about it, and they're going to go away, and they're not going to bother us. So having in writing, you know, maybe employees will, you know, let them know to direct everything to that point person. Having in writing what's a public location, what's a private location, having all of that in place, you know, as the employer, I think it's very important, just to give people a comfort level, and also to document what the employer's policies are in the event it comes up later on in litigation, in any sort of discussion after the fact. So that's what I would say about employer types of policies. But then as far as, ICE policies and travel and, jumping back and forth between two different things. But with respect to travel, we're getting a lot of questions from people saying, they want to travel and they're concerned about it. They've heard a lot of, terrible things going on, people being detained where they shouldn't have been, and, what should they do? And, there aren't a lot of good answers in this realm because what is happening at the borders are somewhat unprecedented, things that we haven't really seen in the past and things that we're not able to anticipate because sometimes there isn't really a legal basis for denying somebody entry or detaining somebody. So what we are, advising individuals to do is, first of all, if you have any sort of criminal record, even if it was from 30 years ago and you thought it was resolved, it's probably not a great idea to travel right now. And if you do have to travel under those circumstances, it's very important to do analysis and understand whether that's going to impact your entry, because the immigration laws that impact individuals who are inside the United States are different from those that you're looking at when you're trying to cross the border and come into the United States. So I'd say that's number one. Second of all, you want to make sure that your immigration status is in order. We've all heard probably about individuals who have pending immigration statuses who have not been admitted into the United States. That can be very problematic. People who have a short duration left in their status, anything that's questionable with regard to status is really something that has to be understood and explored and addressed before leaving the United States and attempting to re-enter the United States. And then I think in addition to that, having all of your documents, making sure you have an appropriate visa in your passport if you're a non-immigrant, making sure it's valid for the duration that you need it to be valid, making sure that if you're coming in, for example, on a work type of visa, an H-1B or an L-1, you have evidence of your employment. And similar, the opposite of that, if you're coming in, for example, on a visitor's visa, it's important that you don't have evidence that you're working in the United States, right? So you're coming in and you're saying, I'm going to visit Disney World for 2 weeks. And then, they look in your wallet and they see business cards that you're working for an employer in the United States. That's going to be problematic. And I think that leads into, people ask a lot about searches as well. Can they search your phones? Can they search your devices, when you're trying to enter the United States? And I think that's also a very difficult question. And I think, there have been court cases saying that they can't and they can in certain circumstances. There have been state cases. And I think it's a little bit of a difficult question. In my opinion, if you're a US citizen and you're entering the United States, you don't have to open up your phone and provide those access to that information. You can be, kept for a while, questioned, devices can be taken from you, but you don't have to, open up your phone and hand it over to an officer in order to enter the United States. If you're a US citizen, you have the right to enter the United States. If you're a permanent resident, again, we're talking about those 3 buckets. You have a green card, you're trying to enter the United States, and this is Customs and Border Protection. They want to look at your phone, they want to look at your laptop. Again, if you don't provide that information, if you don't give them your passwords and give them your devices, they can take those devices. They can hold you for a while and question you. But generally speaking, in that situation, you'd probably be allowed to enter the United States unless there was some other issue going on there. If you're a non-immigrant, however, and you don't turn over your devices, then you're very likely going to be either held for a while or turned around and removed from the United States. So, and I think some of that is unclear because if you look at the Customs and Border Protection website, they will say, well, we have the authority to access all of this evidence. We want to see all of it. And if we ask you for it, you have to give it to us. So I think it can be difficult for people to know what to do in those circumstances. But suffice it to say, travel can be very daunting these days. And, it's if a lot of people are just saying, you know what, I'm going to avoid traveling if I don't have to, because I don't want to worry about what could possibly happen.
John, just sticking with this subject matter for a second and recognizing you work with a lot of companies with a global reach that are dealing with both inbound and outbound travel considerations. Practically, are you seeing employers transition and have you given them practical advice on what the risks and considerations are at present?
It's almost a daily call I have with some employer or some employee that says, I want to travel, I want to go home, I have a business trip to take. I have to do this or that or the next thing. We are 3 months into the new administration, and we, being immigration lawyers, are learning every day as to what is going to happen. And it's many times anecdotal. Uh, Basically, what I'm saying to employers is that unless the business is a necessity to travel, don't. Just hold back a little bit. Let's just see how the dust settles here. Now, sometimes there aren't any issues, and the people go and they come back and it's fine. If you have an employee that has to go abroad and must get a visa stamp, a visa in his or her passport to come back to the US, be aware that there could be significant delays. The US consulates are run by the Department of State. As you know, the Department of State workforce has been lessened, to be diplomatic, and there are very few people compared to before that are able to review and issue visas. So there can be delays. Also, there's increased vetting. Increased vetting means that they're going to be looking security background checks and so forth. Now, this has been going on for decades, but it can slow down the processing significantly. So you might send an employee abroad thinking they're going to be back in 2 weeks, and it'd be 6 months. So you just have to be prepared for that. And depending on the job and the country, frankly, if it's a Middle Eastern country, they may not come back for a very long period of time. We're seeing increased vetting from Muslim based countries. It's just a reality. So you need to be aware of that. So I would say that if you don't need to travel right now, hold back on it, and let's just see what happens in the next couple of months with the Department of State and how the visa processing is going to go. And let me just add to it kind of a slogan that I've taken over the last 30 years or 40 years, and that is if there's an immigration benefit for your employee, and you're wondering whether or not you should try to get it, whether it's to enter the H-1B lottery, to try to get a green card for your employee or whatever, I always file applications. I encourage filing applications at the first opportunity for any benefit that might be available because the laws change. And they're changing now. And some people wish they had filed for something a year ago and now they can't. So if there's an opportunity by you as the employer to file for an immigration benefit for your employee, the sooner you do it, the better.
John and Shiva, I wanna leave some time for audience questions. So audience, now's the time for you to get your questions into the chat session. But let me leave with this question before we expand the discussion. We've got CEOs on this webinar, we've got CFOs, we've got HR professionals. What do you see relative to future considerations for their workforce development in New Hampshire in light of current policy changes and what that may mean looking forward relative to workforce needs?
Shiva, did you want to say something? I saw you nodding your head.
No, I was just, just sort of nodding because I think it's a good question. I think that, it's a very challenging time right now. As John, as you said before, we have only a certain number of H-2B visas, and we have, 500,000 applications for those visas. Same thing with H-1B visas, skilled workers. We have, 85,000 visas available every year. We get, some years, again, 500,000 applications for those visas. And with the the increased vetting that we're talking about, people not being let in, visas not being processed, I just think it's a very difficult time, especially, for sort of the manufacturing positions, the construction, restaurant industry, hospitality. I think it's very challenging. So really, I'm just going to go right back to John, what you said, and that is that when you have an opportunity to file, for a benefit for one of your employees, the benefit can sometimes be for a very short duration. It's important to take advantage of it at that point in time.
Yeah,
So
I think that, excuse me, Shiva, I think that filing applications, for example, for green cards for employees that are in some non-immigrant or temporary status or come to the U.S. intermittently, is a good idea. And people will say, well, how long before the green card will process? And my response might be, well, if successful, 3, 4, 5 years. And before employers were saying, well, that's too long. I don't want to consider that. But now what they're saying is, yeah, let's do that. I'm going to file for 10 people. 6 or 7 of them may come through. I'm willing to take that risk, spend the resources now for the future. So you have to be forward thinking. And when we're looking in the medical community, we're very restricted. Half the doctors in this country are foreign born, but we're very restricted. And we need to move forward with applications for doctors and try to get them a certain waiver called a J waiver. We need to file applications for nurses and physical therapists. They come under a Schedule A, which is a fast track way of trying to get to a green card. But for all sorts, we have to consider Canada and TN visas coming in. So there's different ways you can look at it, but you have to have the long view and be prepared to wait for some immigration benefit to come to a given employee.
Michael, you've got a bird's eye view of this from the head of the BIA. Are there issues you'd like this panel to discuss that you think this audience would be interested in that we haven't already covered?
Well, one general question, and we do have an audience question I want to get to in a moment, but one general question that it'd be good for all three of you to comment on, and I think you referenced throughout today certain points where it would be smart for an employer to seek legal counsel or professional assistance. And I'm just wondering, in addition to that, what are some other resources you would encourage employers to explore? Are there trusted resources, entities or associations that you follow closely for the latest news or updates that internal leaders at employers should be plugging into and following to try and stay abreast of this, in addition to considering when the right time is to bring external expertise in?
Yeah. None of us are jumping at that, Michael, because I'm sitting here thinking, who would I tell an employer to go to stay on top of this? And I really don't have any the sources of information that we have are so diverse. They come from so many different avenues. I know that Shivan and I every day are reading the updates from ICE, from CIS, from DHS, from executive orders on down. Sometimes the first place we find our information is the newspaper. What happened, because it hasn't been published anywhere else yet. I don't know how an employer, an HR professional, can really stay abreast of all of this. It's more than a full-time job for me. I know that.
I agree with that. And I'll just add to that, to what John said, that 100% agree. And we're, immigration lawyers are all members of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, which is our professional organization. And the number of updates that we get from ALA, I mean, you have to watch your email. You have to watch all these updates. As an immigration lawyer, you have to read all of these every day, even if they're not in your practice area. And, it's a full-time job on top of the full-time job, as John said. So I think that, it's I would say impossible for a layperson to really keep up with all of that. And we have this particular resource that we have available to us, which is very helpful. So of course we're a good resource, but I think it's a hard thing for employers to try to keep up with it themselves. I just don't know that there's a place that you could go to do that.
Yeah.
And I'll just add the common sense one, Michael, and some of this looks right back at you as I say it, but I do think any transition, at the national level in terms of administration, but I think in particular this one, I do think the industry associations are stepping up their game. The state associations are stepping up their game. We're all on those listservs. We don't get to read them every day. But I do see the national associations that have a presence in Washington offering a degree of real-time update as to what's going on that's different. So, it may be time to get those out of your secondary reading materials and get them into your email box. But I do think the industry associations are stepping up their game, and it's a place where we can engage, after the workday, perhaps in a way we need to start doing, at least in the short term.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And I know for the BIA, we're working to provide more information and updates from our partners at the national level, whether it's the National Association of Manufacturers, the U.S. Chamber, because they really do, as you said, have the best straight line to what's happening. Couple of quick audience questions, and I think these are really good questions that cover ground that we haven't touched on as of yet. So this question is, contractors on a construction site don't enjoy the luxury of public versus private spaces. A visit from ICE on a construction project can be incredibly disruptive and costly. What damages can an employer recover from an ICE visit that yields no violations?
You want me to, I'll jump in first here on that and say parenthetically that construction is going to be hit hard by the new policies from the Trump administration, because there are undocumented workers that are within the construction industry. Not that they should be working, but they're going to be hit hard. But if you do have an ICE raid on a construction site, you're right, it is all public. They can pretty much go wherever. They probably can't go into the construction trailer, so to speak, where the administrative work is done, but otherwise it's open season. And what kind of damages can you get if they don't find any violations? I think somewhere around zero. I don't think you're going to collect any damages on that whatsoever. They have a right to do this, and if it's disruptive, well, that's the way it is. That's my opinion.
I agree with that. I would add also that, when you think about that, you think about two different types of ICE visits. So one is if they're coming in to do an I-9 audit, which is a little bit more, here's the documentation that we want. You have 3 days to produce it. We're going to look at your workforce. We're going to look and see if these folks are authorized to work in the United States or not once you give us the documentation. When even in that situation, which feels a lot less disruptive because they're not going in and sort of, arresting people and taking people away, the worst thing that comes from that is not the penalties and fines that may result from having non-compliant I-9s, but it is, once we review and we figure out who wasn't authorized to work, then you're required to terminate those people immediately unless you can show that they're authorized to work. And that is the most damaging and disruptive thing that happens to a business when there's an I-9 audit.
Yeah, and in that regard, echoing John's comments, these federal officials have significant immunity. And so unless there is a deliberate and egregious violation of the law, they have discretion to carry out their functions that's grounded in some public policy that's important, but it gives them some flexibility on what they want to do. On the construction front, just let me offer a couple of comments. If I've seen anything in law enforcement through the years, it's just like anything else in the world, whether you're a business person or not. This really does vary by individual, and how this is going to go down, in my experience, oftentimes depends just on human characteristics of the individual in uniform who's in charge, who shows up. And so I think the right attitude is you've got to start with cooperation, particularly if you don't have much control over the area. But there's room in construction to try to negotiate, right? If you've got people up on ladders, if you've got people on second floors, there are some serious safety considerations here where you can have a dialogue and try to maintain some order. And to the point of contact, you just need to have somebody that's ready to do that, that has the right verbal skills and perhaps a degree of persuasion that can reach. Doesn't mean it's not going to work. It's going to vary depending on why they're there and who they may or may not be after. But I think in that circumstance, when the cards are so stacked against you, you've got to go into it cooperatively and try to find some room to negotiate.
So one more question before we pivot to another topic, but I also want to encourage folks to continue to post questions on either this topic of immigration and also the upcoming topic of tariffs. So this question is, should U.S. citizens be concerned their return to the country may be at risk if they were away on business travel and/or vacation travel? Example, going on a business trip to Canada or a vacation trip to Mexico. So this is a little bit different of a take on the travel advisory advice, specifically for U.S. citizens.
So I'll go ahead. So a U.S. citizen, assuming that they have evidence of their U.S. citizenship, in other words, a passport, they've got to have a U.S. passport, should always be admitted into the United States. There's a lot of discussion about, what if they've committed a crime? What if they, have something in their phone that's unlawful? Those can be dealt with in the United States. U.S. citizens who have, criminal issues will be dealt with when they come in, but they will be admitted always to the United States. I think there's a lot of concern about that. And we've had so many questions. I can't tell you how many people have called me and said, can you be available? Can you be on call when I cross the border? Because I'm concerned. I've been a U.S. citizen for 40 years, but I'm concerned that I'm not going to be admitted into the United States. I think it's a very real concern. And I think that, we can't really predict the unknown. We can't predict. And I think this is where the fear comes in. You're standing there, you've got one Customs and Border Protection officer who has the discretion to just determine, what's going to happen. And is there a way that they're going to figure out to not admit a U.S. citizen? I'm going to say no, that should not happen. There's no, basis in the law for that to happen. U.S. citizens should always be admitted, but they do have to carry with them evidence of their citizenship and documentation that allows them specifically to enter the United States, which is a U.S. passport.
Yeah, I
In most
agree with that
cases.
wholeheartedly. If you're a U.S. citizen, you shouldn't have any trouble getting into the U.S. Just as a comment, I get those requests too. Can I have your cell number in case I can't get into the country? No, I'm not going to give you my cell number, first of all. But secondly, until you pass passport control, if you will, you're not in the United States. You're in the airport. And ICE has complete control. You don't have any rights as a person under the U.S. Constitution. You're in limbo. So I can't speak to you. I can't help you at that point.
Well, John, Shiva, Michael, thank you for this overview and discussion. There's a lot to digest, but clearly this is a dynamic topic that employers need to keep their eyes on and explore resources on. I want to welcome folks to continue to post questions. We'll be sending out recap and links and resources. I wanted to pivot quickly in the time we have left and provide a quick update on tariff and trade negotiations. This is another federal policy issue that we continue to hear a lot of questions from our members on. My colleague Laura is going to be posting some links for everyone to see, and I wanted to just touch base quickly on them, provide some updates, but also attempt to answer some questions as well, if there are any. Like the immigration issue, the tariff issue has been moving quickly and changing nearly on a daily basis. And so plugging into organizations like the BIA and others is a great source of information. The first resource I wanted to point to is the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs has a resource page dedicated to the tariff issue for employers. So I would recommend reviewing that page. It has some good information, some resources, some strategies to explore if you are directly or indirectly impacted by tariff policy. Secondly, there's also a link from the U.S. Chamber that gives some background information on the potential impact of this issue. And once you land on that page, you can actually navigate to a specific subpage on New Hampshire and download a fact sheet on trade in New Hampshire that has some pretty important numbers, and you can see how important international trade is to New Hampshire's economy, how many jobs are supported by it. We have, according to this document, 180,000 jobs in New Hampshire dependent upon international trade, and $12 billion worth of goods that are exported. So, this is a big part of our economy, and for employers, important to stay plugged in on this issue. And then finally, I wanted to also share the BIA recently published a column detailing the impact of tariffs on New Hampshire manufacturers. We spoke with 5 manufacturing executives about the aluminum and steel tariffs and the potential impact. And I think it gave a helpful perspective. Just to step back, broad overview, February 1st of this year, the president announced 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, as well as a 10% tariff on China. Most recently, just in the last couple of days, there was another tariff announced related to countries importing Venezuelan oil, which could impact China as they are a significant importer of Venezuelan oil. And then we're really looking ahead to April 2nd, because that is a day that the administration has identified as a significant news day in terms of announcing potential reciprocal tariffs targeting other countries that impose tariffs on U.S. goods. It's been very challenging to stay on top of what tariffs are going into place, what are being pulled back, what are being delayed. And so the observation that we've heard from members is this is causing many businesses to pause, pull back, introduces some uncertainty into their decision making for the next couple of months. And that's a real challenge. And I think what we're really looking for, and what I think we would all hope for, is an off-ramp to a broader understanding of what is going to be our trade negotiation, our trade policy with these key partners, Mexico, Canada, and China as well. What our employers can expect in terms of the country's trade policy and position for the foreseeable futures to allow for the type of planning, investment, and pricing strategy for employers that are impacted in this space. So my advice to employers and members who are curious about this issue is to look for updates from us, follow the news closely. The U.S. Chamber and NAM are putting out a lot of good information. One thing that would be valuable to us in our efforts is if you have a specific impact that is impacting your business related to a tariff that's being enacted, or if the uncertainty is impacting your business, to share that story with us, share that information with us. We're receiving a lot of requests from our delegation members, our federal delegation members, as well as our federal partners, to try to categorize and list and enumerate what employers are feeling for this. We understand that the administration has a goal to use these tariffs to address certain issues, whether it's border security or trade imbalances, but we have to balance that with the impact to the economy in the short and near term. And so having that real world information from our members as to how this is impacting your decision making, your investments, your hiring plans, your pricing is really helpful to our advocacy efforts. So I wish I could give more definitive understanding of what's happening on this front, but truly it seems to be a day-to-day, week-to-week consideration. But I would really look to the news cycle coming up around April 2nd as a key pivot point. One of the things to really look for from that day is, are there certain exclusions that are going to be formally announced? Typically what we've seen so far from the administration is tariffs are announced in the broadest sense possible. But what we don't know is the actual effectiveness date, and if there are going to be any exclusions on certain products, certain supply chains, or certain levels of detail within that. And that's what really matters in terms of understanding how it will be impacted, how it will be carried out, and its impact on the business community. So we'll include those links in our follow-up to members, but I would encourage you to please reach out and share your background. We're getting close to time. We're right up on time, but John, Michael, Shiva, any closing notes or items that you wanted to share just as we wrap up our conversation today?
Just thanks everyone for listening, and if we can be of any assistance in helping you navigate this ever-changing world, particularly with respect to your workforce needs, glad to follow up informally, and please give us a call, and very nice to spend this time with you.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for your time today. We appreciate it. Please let us know questions, feedback, insights. This could be a conversation we continue. Given the amount of news and change that's happening, we want to be responsive to your needs. So we really appreciate everyone's time and interest, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.